Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to landscape photography editing. Just about every single form of photography today benefits from doing at least some editing. It's rare that the photo is completely finished right after pressing the shutter button. And this is especially true of landscape photography, where we often have these incredibly dynamic scenes with really dark foregrounds and often bright skies. And not only that, but I personally find editing to be such a meditative and important part of my creative process. Through editing, we get to make these creative choices that affect how the end result comes out, which just makes it feel like you have more of a hand in the creation. There are a few different editing programs out there to choose from, but I mainly use Adobe Photoshop for all of my editing. And I'll walk you through an Adobe Lightroom edit as well, since I think people are generally more familiar with Lightroom than they are with Photoshop. But in my opinion, Photoshop makes it easier to mask and do more like selective editing, so that's why I favor Photoshop over Lightroom. I personally do quite a bit of selective editing in my work, but Lightroom has come a long way with its masking capabilities, so it's really just what you're trying to accomplish with the edit and what your personal preference is. Before we hop in, I also wanted to mention a tool that I love and use for editing, a pen tablet. So this is the Wacom Intuos Pro medium-sized tablet, and it feels more intuitive to me because it's like you're just writing with a pen or like painting with a paintbrush, and that allows you to be more precise while you're making those selective edits. It can be really tricky to have controlled movement when you're trying to use like a laptop trackpad or a mouse. Not impossible, of course. I actually learned how to use Photoshop on a trackpad and that's it. But it is definitely more difficult and less enjoyable than a pen tablet in my experience. Okay, first up, let's jump into Lightroom. All right, I have chosen this reflection photo from Glacier National Park, and I shot this on my on a Sony a7R IV and Sony's 24-70mm f2.8 G Master lens. I'm going to go over to the Develop tab, and I shot this with a neutral density filter so that I could smooth out the water. There wasn't quite a perfect reflection, so by using a 15-second shutter speed, I was able to smooth out the water and just enhance the reflection. Also, it adds some nice movement to the clouds up here. So there are a few different ways to approach editing, and everyone has their own workflow and what works for them. But for me, I like to start envisioning what I want the photo to look like. You have a lot of creative options for direction on how you want to take a photo while you're editing, and so this is really where your creativity can come to life. For this shot, I think that we've got some nice soft clouds, and I want to give them more of a pink hue, and we've got this golden hour light like peeking through some of the clouds too, hitting the mountains and the trees, which is nice. And I think there's also a little bit of light hitting over here. And so I want to bring that out. Also, this left shore and the reflection are so much darker and more contrasty than the right. And so I'd like to lift that up a bit, make them feel like they're a little bit more even in their luminosities. And I feel like the center point of the photo is also a little bit off. I think it's more here, and right now it's a little bit far to the left. So I think I'll start with a little bit of a crop and a rotate to even out the horizon as well. But I edit my photos really quickly with the screen brightness at about 3 clicks to the maximum brightness. I find that you don't want your photos to be at maximum brightness because that's not often how your work is going to be viewed. We don't want to edit our photos so that they are properly viewed on a bright screen. We want them to be viewed at like the average normal brightness that someone will view. Also, I edit my landscape photos on a white background first. If you watched my astrophotography editing event space, that was just a couple of weeks ago, I edit my astrophotography on a black background, and that's because it's usually a darker image, and so that white around it can be really harsh to your eyes. But for landscape photography, I actually prefer the white background, and then I check it on a black background when I'm done. Right. It's usually a good practice to do any noise reduction on your photo first, because as you go through and do more editing, this adds more grain to your photo. But if I zoom in on this photo, because I used that neutral density for a long exposure, it's actually pretty smooth. There's not a whole lot of grain, so I don't think I need to do any noise reduction to this photo. All right, so let's start with, those basic edits. I'll start with the crop and rotation. So I'll go over to the little crop panel. And I think I'm gonna start with rotation first. It looks like it needs to be rotated a little bit. I'm looking at that horizon line where the water meets the land. I feel like that looks pretty close. And then I also want that horizon line to be right in the middle. And you can see this little bulge on the side is showing me where the middle of the photo is, and that line is a little bit below it. So I'm gonna drag the right corner down a bit so that it's perfectly in the middle. Then it still feels like that center point is a little bit off. And I'm kind of looking at these mountains as well to help guide me. It feels like if I'm looking at, the thirds lines in comparison to the mountains, it feels like a little bit to the left. So I'm just gonna drag this side over a smidge until those mountains start to feel a little more even. Now I think that's a little bit better. They're both kind of just touching the thirds line. Yeah, I think that feels better. Cool. Now we'll go over, and I know that I'm already immediately going to want this to be a little bit warmer, but I will say when you're editing your photos, it's always a best practice to start with your luminosities first. So this is your brightness, your contrast, bringing shadows up, things like that. Because as you tweak that also tweaks your colors. So if you spend all this time getting your colors just how you want them, and then you go in and you start tweaking contrast and things like that, your colors are going to change. So it's always best to do your luminosities first, except when you already know, like your white balance, you're gonna wanna change it a little bit at the beginning. I definitely know I want this to be warmer. So I think let's go up, let's do something fairly warm. Maybe like close to 7,300. Oh, that didn't stick. Okay. And then tint, I think I also want this to be, like I said, I want to bring out the pinks in those clouds. So I'm going to drag this up quite a bit too. Yeah, well, that's kind of nice. All right. Exposure and contrast for global edit. I'm not going to deal with that yet because I want to bring these shadows up first selectively. So I'm going to skip the exposure and contrast first. Then I'm going to do, I guess let's drag some highlights down. It's a little bit hot over here where the sun is really shining on that mountain. So I'm going to bring those down a bit. And then shadows, definitely I think overall could use a little bit of a bump. It's pretty good. I don't want to bring them up too much. But yeah, we can start to see the light kind of barely hitting the trees on that side, which is really nice. I'm not going to mess with the whites or the blacks. I guess let's add a little bit of clarity too. I don't want to add too much, and you have to be careful with this slider in particular, just because when you start to go all the way, it gets really gritty and it can get kind of nasty. So I want this to be a little bit more soft and serene, so I don't want to add too much, but just a little bit to bring out a little bit of like the clouds. Yeah, okay. Do I want dehaze? I don't know, let's see. I think no. And even if you're not new to editing, it is perfectly okay if you're not sure what you want to do to a photo until you're kind of in there messing around with it. Like, do I want dehaze? I'm not sure. It works on some photos, it doesn't work on others. And I think that there's nothing wrong with, playing around and just, not everything is going to apply exactly across the board to every photo. So play around. You can always Command Z it or go back to 0 if you don't like it. Then vibrance and saturation, of course, I'm going to save that toward the end when I get into the color. So now let's move on to the mask section. So I'm going to go over here to this mask panel. And initially what I want to fix is this left shore in the reflection over here. I want to brighten that up. So I'm going to use a brush tool. And with this, we'll bring up our brush mask, and I want the feather to be 100%, I want it to be very soft brush. I'm gonna bring the flow and the density all the way up so it's a completely opaque brush, and I'm gonna leave the auto mask on. Auto mask it's Lightroom's way of like helping you to color within the lines, if you will. So it is really helpful. You'll see as I start to go over these trees, it's not really selecting the clouds that are behind it. It's kind of just stopping it at the trees. So that's really nice. Here I have to be a little bit more careful. There's not quite as much of an edge. Color this in. And then where it kind of gets smaller here, I'm going to drag the flow and the density of my brushes down, or my brush down a little bit. So the flow is, if you have, say, like a 30% brush, or let's just drag this down to 30 for demonstration's sake. I'll bring this back up to 100. So as I'm coloring over something, you can see it's pretty light. That's just 30% getting through. But if I go over it and over it and over it, it starts to build up over time. So flow will allow you to build up kind of like you're building up paint layers on a canvas, whereas density will never let you, no matter how many times you color over it, if you're still at that 30%, it's only going to be 30%. So they're both useful in different sort of ways, but right now I'm just going to drag these down so that I get a little bit more of a softer edge as I'm coming through this little section. I might want to remove a little bit by pressing the Option key or Alt on PC. I'm just going to remove a little bit up here. I think I got a little too much onto those other trees. All right, so let's see how that looks. I think I'm just going to try dragging the shadows up first. Yeah. That looks pretty nice. I think I will add a little bit of contrast though, just so it's not too soft. Not a ton, just a little bit. All right, yeah, I think that looks better. I could maybe go a little more with the shadows. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, so now that I have that sort of where I want it to be in reference to the rest of the image, I can go back to my global edit panel over here, and I can play with the exposure and the contrast now. So I think overall we could use a little bit more brightness. I'm gonna go to like 30 maybe, and then for contrast, I definitely want to add a little bit of contrast, not a ton. And then I think brightening it, these highlights are still a little bit hot now, so I'm gonna drag them down even more. And I feel like, I don't know if it's just me or if my eyes are getting worse as I'm getting older, but I do find kind of like sitting back a little can kind of help you get a better picture. You can always, zoom in or out, but I still kind of feel just kind of leaning back a little can help you see a little bit better. Okay, so now I think luminosity-wise, I feel like this looks pretty good. So I think I'm just going to start editing color now. And I'm gonna do that selectively first. So let's go back into our mask panel. And initially, I really wanna make the trees more green. Like as I'm looking at them, I feel like they could use a little more punch and a little more green. So I'm going to copy this mask that I already made so I don't have to rebrush that. So I'm going to duplicate mask 1. It's going to create another mask, but it's going to also duplicate the changes that I made to that initial mask. So what I want to do is with the copy is hit reset. So it gives me just blank mask now, but I have this selection. And I'm going to add to it with a brush, and I'm just going to go all 100% flow and density for this section over here for now. Again, I have my auto mask checked. It should do a pretty good job since there's a pretty clear distinction on this side just because of the snow line. And then in this center part, I do want some of that to be more green, but I don't want it to be full-blown, like 100% opacity. So I'm gonna bring these sliders down and just kind of go in here with a little bit. That's pretty good. I don't want to get too close to the edge over here. Yeah, okay. So let's start with the tint slider. I want to add some green. Ooh, yeah, that looks nice. But I think I do want to add a little warmth to it as well. So I am going to add a little bit of yellow back with it. It just feels more rich now, more vibrant, I guess, but I didn't want to just up the vibrance and saturation. I wanted to actually give it a little bit more green. Then let's add some saturation to it, really give it a punch. Oh, yeah, that looks nice. Cool. All right, so now I think we can move to some global color. So I will go back into my global edit panel over here. And I actually think I want to make it a smidge more, more warm. So I think I'm going to drag this up a little. And then maybe I want a little more pink too. I really want those clouds to pop. Yeah, that's nice. All right. Now let's add some vibrance and saturation. So the difference between the two, vibrance looks at more of the subtle colors and enhances the subtle colors of your image, and saturation is more of a global, every color gets boosted. I don't want to do too much saturation just because this already feels pretty nice and colorful. Yeah, let's see how it looks on a black background. Just right-clicking on the space outside here. And what I check for is there enough contrast? Like if I put it on a black background, does it look like the shadows are a little bit muted or a little bit dull? And I feel like it looks pretty good against the black background, so I think that looks pretty good to me. I mean, I could probably make a few more adjustments, but I think that looks pretty great. Let's take a look at the before and after by just hitting the backslash. It's really blue. I really like the more magenta-y color in this after. Oh, I think we have a pretty nice looking landscape photo now. You know, I think it looked good before, but you know, through editing, I was able to put my spin on it, and you know, we certainly brought out color in the clouds. I think that looks pretty cool, and they feel much more like dramatic and more just more emphasis on them. And you know, the left shore feels much more balanced to the right as well, and now I feel like the center point is definitely much better. Cool, so let's hop over into Photoshop now, and we'll chat through a more complicated edit. So open the photos that you'd like to open in Photoshop. It will automatically open them if they're RAW photos, which they should be, in Adobe Camera Raw first. So I have these two photos that I took in Norway with my A7R5, Sony A7R5, and the Sony 24-70mm f2.8 G Master Mark II. They were shot at 12:27 p.m., which I think is kind of wild. It's like the sun doesn't rise very high in the Arctic in the winter here, and you just get this beautiful golden light for so many more hours. It's really fantastic. It's like a photographer's dream, really. But the reason I have these two images, I really like the composition of this image, but I really like the wave crashing over here in this image. So I want to take that and put it into this image. And the reason why I'm doing that, I could just, you know, this is Nate, my partner, he photobombed me while I was taking this. He's taking a photo or video with his phone. And it would be easy to remove him from this, but if you notice as I zoom in, the sort of rocks in the foreground are the focal point, or the focus point, I should say, not the mountains. And I took a bunch of different photos with different focal points, and I really like how this other photo the mountains are what's in focus, because I feel like the mountains are really the focal point. The reflection in this kind of like tidal pool in here is kind of just a nice little bonus. So I really want to use this photo, but then I want to add the wave from this one. And talking through like other things that I want to do, I definitely want to emphasize the beautiful golden light, and I think we could add a lot more depth and dimension in these clouds to make them really epic and really dramatic. I think the mountains could be a little bit brighter as well, and then the reflection, I think I want to lighten that up too. And I think I'm going to remove some of these rocks. They feel a little distracting to me, but you know, to each their own. So first I'm going to make some minor adjustments in Camera Raw. I'm going to start with my main image. Oh, I guess these are showing already. Let's just reset those. Okay. For some reason those edits were already on there. Okay, well, let's brighten it up a bit. I don't want to go too much because I don't want the sky over here to get blown up, or to get blown out, rather. Let's add a little contrast. Highlights, I think I could drag these down for that left sky. I think I'm gonna go fairly far with that. I do want to lift some shadows. Maybe like there. Yeah, and then I'm not gonna play with the whites or blacks here, so let's move on to the color. And I think I want to warm it up just a little. It's already a fairly warm photo, but I do want to warm it up a little bit. And then I think I will add some magenta as well. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna leave the vibrance and saturation again for now, so I can do that separately. I have a feeling that this is going to need much less saturation than this over here, so I'm just gonna leave those as they are. Now I will select this photo, and I can either Command C or Control C to copy those edits, or you can go to the little 3-dot menu here and go to Copy Edit Settings. And I'm going to click on this other photo and Command V or Control V for PC to paste, or you can go to the 3 dots and go to Paste Edit Settings. So now both of these photos have the same edits applied to them. So I'm going to click on one, hit Shift to select both of them, and hit Open. Now these will open in Photoshop for us. And just like Lightroom, I'm going to edit this on a white background first, and then at the end I will check it on a black background to see how it looks. So first I'm going to add these two photos together. Right now, you know, it opened them up in separate tabs because they're separate images. So I am going to go to this photo over here with Nate photobombing me. And in order to drag it over, see if I try to move it now, it's telling me, no, you can't do that. And that's because the layer is locked. So if we click on the lock, it unlocks it. Now I can click and drag it over. So click on it to drag. Now hold the Shift key, hover over your other tab up here, bring it down and release it on the photo. You can release Shift now and it will release it exactly how it needs to be placed. And now I'm going to remove the lock on the lower layer as well. And I want to align these images. You can see they're not quite aligned. This one, the right one's a little bit tilted up. A really super easy way to do this in Photoshop is to auto-align it. It'll do it for you. But it'll take the image that's on top and use that as your alignment metric. And I would rather have, I think I like the alignment of this photo better. So I'm going to put this photo on top. Then Shift and Select to copy or to select both layers. Then go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. This pop-up will come up. I'm just going to leave it on auto, and I'm not going to select vignette removal or geometric distortion. I'm just going to hit OK. Photoshop is going to do its thing. And now we can see it aligned these layers pretty well. Nice. Cool. And just for my own organization's sake, I am going to name these. So this one, just double clicking, I'm gonna name this main, because that's the main photo. And then this one, double click, and I'm gonna name this Nate Photobomb Wave, just so I can keep my layers straight. Okay, and as you can see, because there was a difference in the size for these images for where they aligned, there's a little bit of transparency around, and it's much easier in Lightroom to crop a photo initially and then you can readjust it later. It's much more complicated in Photoshop to do that, so I always leave my cropping and rotating and things like that until the very end. So I'm going to leave that for now. And then I'll put the wave photo on top because I'm going to want to place that wave on top of my main image. Now this is a good point to save my file. So Shift Command S, or you can go up to File Save. Let's just save this as Photoshop Edit for now. And it's formatted with a large document format instead of a Photoshop document, and I usually just leave it as large document format because the Photoshop file size has a limit of 2 GB. Often with A7R5 photos and these higher resolution images, the files end up being a bit bigger than 2 GB. So I just leave it in large document format because then it's unlimited. We hit save, maximize compatibility, sure, and then it's going to do its thing. And then the next step would be any denoising. While it's saving, I'll just zoom in here. I feel like there's a little bit of noise, but really it's not enough, I think, to need to denoise anything. I think it's actually like the good kind of noise where it looks like a real photo. Sometimes when you apply noise reduction and you go a little bit too far with it, everything's very smooth and it can start to make the image look a little bit fake. So I think I'm gonna leave it as is. If I were going to denoise it, I would use a third-party plugin called Topaz Denoise AI, but I'm not going to do that, so I'm just gonna leave it as it is. So now let's go ahead and let's add the wave photo to the main photo. What I'm going to want to do now is mask, just like in Lightroom, I only want to mask this portion. And so I want to hide everything else. I want to just have this wave showing through. And so how we can do that is with a layer mask. If we go down to this little rectangle with the circle in it, click it, it adds a white box to our layer. And if you're not familiar with layer masks in Photoshop, they are a little bit confusing at first. But the rule of thumb is, or the saying to help remember, is that white reveals and black conceals. So right now, this little rectangle is completely white, which means the entire layer is visible. Everything is being revealed. If I were to switch it so everything is black, then that means that the entire layer would be hidden. And so what I want to do is I do want to hide the entire layer except for that little wave section. So what I'm going to do is, since this is white right now, I just want to invert it so that it's black. Easy way to do that is Command or Control for PC, Command I. And it immediately, as you can see, it makes this black. So now I can go in and I can add, just really I'm going to paint back in. I'm going to reveal using that white brush. So if right now we see there's a black square on top. This is the brush colors over here. If I go to B for my brush tool, we can see right now that black is on top. So if I try to brush this wave back in right now, nothing's gonna happen because it's just painting black on top of this black that's already there. So it's not revealing anything. So if I swap these so that white is on top by either hitting the arrows or the X key, now I can go in and I can start to paint these waves in. And let's see, right now at 100%, I think I am going to use like a slightly hard brush. And luckily they match up pretty well. The alignment was quite successful. Sometimes Photoshop can struggle a tiny bit with aligning some images, but since these were like pretty closely aligned to begin with, it's actually a pretty good selection. And you can see, since the other photo had a different focal point, this background now is as I'm revealing the layer that was below this current one, it's a little bit out of focus. And so I'll go through and I'll fix that after the fact. But right now I'm just trying to figure out where the wave starts and where it ends. Looks like right there is where it ends. So I'll just fill this little bit in. And this is, again, you know, such a great portion of the editing process for a pen tablet. It's so much easier, just feels like I'm drawing than, you know, trying to use a mouse. So now I'm going to go back through and hide these sort of out of focus sections that feel a little bit off. And so of course, how do I hide something? How do I conceal something? I use that black brush. So I'm just gonna hit the X key to have the black on top. And instead of a slightly hard brush, I'm just going to use a very soft brush. I'm just gonna start hiding, painting this back in. And I'm gonna leave the bits where there's some like spray going on, and I think it's gonna be so minute that you won't be able to see that. If I were going to be printing this quite large, I would go in and I would definitely make sure that all of those little bits are selected out. But for our sake today, I'm not gonna do that. I feel like that would be pretty boring to watch, but I don't know, maybe you would like it. Okay. So now we've got our wave. Pretty easy, right? Cool. Now, you know, I could, you know, like I guess I mentioned before that this was, the foreground of the other one was sharper and then the background was blurred. And if you wanted this to be a little bit sharper, you could use like Topaz Sharpen AI on it, or like the filter Camera Raw and go to the detail sharpening section. But I actually feel like it's like not 100% in focus, which I feel like actually works well in this instance, where this is out of focus, then it's slightly more in focus, and then very in focus. So I actually think it works quite well being like a tad bit out of focus. Okay, so now I would like to remove these rocks. Usually the process that I do is if I'm going to remove or add anything to the image, I do all of that first, and then I go through and I do the luminosities and the color and things like that. There are so many different ways you can remove things in Photoshop. I'll show you 3 different methods that I use. The first one is the spot healing brush tool, which is this little band-aid over here. You could select that guy. And I don't want to edit what I'm doing on this wave layer. I want to create a new layer, so go down to this little box with the plus in it. And this is that if for some reason down the line I feel like I don't like this selection or this removal that I made, I don't have to worry about trying to figure out like if it's on this layer, how do I go back and fix it, or if it's on one of these other layers. Just putting it on its own distinct layer makes it so much easier. I can just delete it or I can change it. It's much easier. So just gonna put it on this new layer here, and it should be at like a soft brush with little spacing, and I think let's do the content aware and sample all layers as well. So I'm wanting it to look at this layer below, obviously, because the layer I'm on right now, it's completely empty. And so I'm just gonna literally just paint over it like that, and boom, it's gone. This tool is really, really helpful for sensor spot removal. If you have any of those, this tool is like the perfect use case for it. Let's see how it does down here on this little rock. Yeah, that was pretty okay. It's a little bit of kind of hard lines that it made, but actually that's looking pretty good. Okay, and the next option is the newer, let's try the generative fill for this larger one here. So I don't need to make a new layer for this. Actually, let's name this one Small Left Rock. But the generative fill adds its own new layer, so I don't have to worry about adding a layer for this one. So what I'm going to do is select this rock using the lasso tool, or L, and I have a pretty hefty feather on it so that it's a little bit of a softer selection. So let's just click and draw to make our selection here. And then this little taskbar is going to come up. And if you don't see this on your Photoshop, you can go into Window and Contextual Taskbar. That's how you get that to pop up. So now let's hit Generative Fill. It'll ask you if you want to type anything in to generate, but when you're removing things, you usually can just leave it. If it's a specific thing you're trying to remove, you could put like remove people or something, but I'm just gonna leave it like this. Usually it does a pretty good job at just looking at the surrounding environment. So let's see how it does. Oh, that's pretty nice. You can look through the different options. It'll generate 3 different options. And I definitely want to make sure I'm looking at this cloud and the reflection. It did change it quite a bit in that photo. Ooh, that one looks pretty nice. That looks the closest to the cloud, I think, than either of those options. So let's go with this one. I think this looks pretty good. And let's name this one Large Left Rock. And then the last one I think I'm going to remove is this little one here. And the method that I'm going to use for that one is the clone stamp tool. So let's add a new layer. This is one where we need to add a new layer, just like the other tool. And you can hit S for clone stamp or come over here to the little stamp icon in your toolbar. I'm going to leave the opacity at 100%, flow 100%. It's going to sample current and below, and then soft brush. So what you have to do now is tell Photoshop where you want it to clone something from. And so I think this sort of section here is probably the closest. So I'm going to hold Option or Alt on PC and click. Then I can release Alt. Now you see if I hover, it's showing me what it'll look like. And once I start actually pressing down and brushing, it'll show that little plus sign of this is where it's sampling from. And if I get too close to the mountains, it's going to do that. So let's add another one like here. And that's pretty good there. Okay, so now I feel like there is a little bit of, like I can kind of tell that this was a little bit darker. Also, it looks like it's a little bit of a light spot here that's standing out to me. So let's go back into our stamp, and I'm just going to maybe at like 50%-ish. I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. Okay. This feels a little bit dark, so what I can do now is I can add some brightness to it. And to do that selectively, let's just add a brightness/contrast adjustment. And now you'll see if I add brightness, the entire image gets brighter, and I don't want that. I just want this clone stamped section. So let's add a clipping mask. So how I clip it to this layer is just hold Option or Alt, and you'll see if you hover between the layers, this little arrow pops up. Just click in between, and now you'll see this arrow is showing this layer is only being affected, or is only affecting this layer below it. And now let's see, I'm gonna turn that on and off. I think that's probably a little bit too much. Yeah, so just maybe like, just a slight brightness to it. I think that helps. Let's turn this on and off. Yeah, maybe like 4. All right, I feel like you would never know that that was there unless you had, of course, seen it beforehand. Yeah, cool. So those are a few different methods. Let's just name this one as well, top right rock. But a few different methods for removal in Photoshop. Okay, now let's go into our luminosities. I think that I've removed and I've added everything I think that I want to for this image so far. So let's first add a curves layer, which is this little graph with the S in it. And if you're not familiar with curves, basically over here on the left are your shadows, and then here are your highlights. And it kind of shows you a little bit of a graph of like the different tones in your image. And what I'm gonna do now, I just want to add a little bit of brightness overall to the image, but I don't want to brighten the shadows too much. I want to keep these portions like dark and contrasty. So I clicked up here to lighten my kind of midtones-ish, the lighter midtones. And then down here in this bottom corner, I'm going to click on the line and drag that down a little bit. So I'm making a very, very gentle S-curve. You might have heard of an S-curve before, and basically that's what this is. It's adding a little bit of contrast. I'm just being more selective with it, where I'm lightening the lights more than I'm darkening the darks. And I think I might actually want to mask out this. I don't want to brighten that too much. So you'll notice every adjustment layer, or adjustment, yeah, I guess layer that I've added, it adds its own layer mask, which is really helpful. So I can just go in and I can use my brush tool with the B or over here with the paintbrush. And I can just make my brush bigger with the right bracket key and maybe like 50% opacity brush, just to keep things a little bit less harsh. You'll notice right now my black is on the top, so that means that I'm going to conceal, and that's what I want to do. I want to conceal that brightness just in this area. And get it maybe over here, but mostly it's this side. Okay, I think that looks good. All right, now I think these top clouds, and we'll get to the reflection ones in a bit, but I think these, I want to darken these darker areas and, you know, bring out these lighter areas. So with that, I'm going to add another curves layer, and there are a few different ways I could go about this. I could just, you know, make my own points on the line, but let's try this little hand slider tool. It's one of my favorite tools. I really love this. So if you click it, watch what happens as I hover over my image on this line. You can see it's showing me the different points where, you know, my specific image, where the different luminosity areas are, which is pretty cool. So let's click on, I'm gonna move this over a little bit. So I'm just kind of looking at these clouds right here. So the darkest section is probably up here. So I'm going to click and drag down quite a bit. And then this is probably one of the lighter sections. Let's drag that up a little bit. Right, I think I want to make these darks a little bit darker, so I'm just going to drag that down. You'll notice it's affecting the entire image right now, but we're going to be selecting just the brushing in just the clouds up here in a second. But let's see how that, just the clouds, let's see how that's, oh yeah, definitely adds a little bit of dimension to them, which is nice. So now let's mask out just these clouds. An easy way to do that is to go to Select Sky. Photoshop will do a pretty good job of selecting the sky for you. So now if I hit Shift Command I, or you can go up to Select and Inverse, instead of the sky that I'm wanting to select, I'm wanting to hide, or I guess I should say right now, so everything is white. And I just want to hide the mountain section, but we used the selection for the sky. So right now, if I were to delete it, it would say that the sky portion is masked out, but I want the mountains and everything down here to be masked out. So I had to inverse my selection. Now, if I hit Command Delete, or sorry, Option Delete, or Alt Delete if you're on PC, you can see now that it made that selection where just this bottom portion is hidden and the clouds up here are revealed. So that's a really easy way to do that. And I do think I want to mask this section out as well again. I don't want that to be part of this selection. So with my black brush on top, I'm just going to, let's use 100% opacity. I'm just going to hide this portion. Cool. So now if I turn that layer on and off, you can see it's just those clouds. Now I think I want to specifically darken just these few areas that are already a bit dark. So I'm going to add separate curves layer. I'm just going to drag the center like midline down, or midpoint. And then I'm going to inverse that because I just want to paint in these few different different areas that are very small. So Command or Control I to inverse it. So now everything on that is hidden, and I want to reveal it. But this is really where I think the pen tool shines. There are these different selections up here. If I press this, you'll notice, let's turn my quick mask on by hitting the backslash key. If I make the white brush on top so that I can reveal through the black, you'll see if I just press really lightly on my pen, it's like very, very, very minimal opacity. But if I press really hard, then it's full opacity. And it's really, really cool that with your pen pressure, you can make those decisions. And the same thing goes with this over here. This one will affect the brush size. So if I just press down really lightly, you'll see it's a small dot. But if I press really hard, then it creates a big circle. So those are really helpful for doing this selective masking here. And let's go through and let's make sure that our white is on top so that we are revealing on a black layer. And let's just go in, paint some of this. And what I'm really trying to do is add some depth and dimension to these clouds. By making these areas a little bit darker versus a little bit lighter, it just helps to add more of like a 3D quality to them. So I'm really kind of just going over the areas that are already a bit darker. And maybe that's a little too dark, so what we can do, So what we can do is, instead of going through and, I could just move this up, but oftentimes what I like to do is just change the opacity of the layer because it's quick and easy. So up here it says opacity 100%. I can just click and drag this down until I feel more satisfied with it. So I feel like that looks pretty nice. We added some depth in there. There's already quite a bit of darkness in the reflection, so I think I'm not going to do that for the reflection, but I am going to lighten the reflection. So in order to do that, let's just do another select. Oh, let's add our curves layer first. And then let's do the select. Actually, let's just brush it in. That'll be easy. So let's maybe lighten it. I'll double click on the graph here. Again, I'm just going to drag the midtones up a bit. And then I'm going to hide everything. So Command or Control I while selected on the layer mask. Then with my white brush selected, I am going to turn off the pen pressure settings for this because I just want 100% of it to be the reflection here. So just going to 100% this, and then on those sections where it's touching like the mountains and such, I'm going to go through and I'm going to fix that. With my quick mask, it's really helpful to show you where you're masking, kind of like in Lightroom. If you hit the backslash key, it'll show you. In Lightroom, the red is usually selected for the actual selection, but I prefer it to be inverted so that the red is what's hidden. It kind of makes sense to me that there's something covering it, but to each their own. You can adjust those settings as you like in Photoshop or in Lightroom too. So I'm just bringing a little bit of this back. And that's probably good. Let's see how that looks. Maybe a little bit bright. So let's just drag the opacity down. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And you can be a little bit more picky with that selection, but just for time's sake, I'm going through this a little bit quicker. I'm just doing a kind of a rough mask there. All right, now I think the mountains could be brighter. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that I really want to make those pop. So an easy way to do that is to make our curves layer. Let's go to select sky again. And this time I do want to hide that selection that we just made. So if I just hit Command Delete or Control Delete, it'll add that selection to your layer mask. So now you can see over here that the sky is hidden. And for the same thing, we can do the mask that we just created. So if we hit hold Command or Control on PC, and you hover over your layer mask, you see like this little rectangle or this little box comes up with dashes around it. If we click while holding that Command button, it's going to make our selection here. Like it just re-brings up that selection, which is nice. So now if I go back up to the layer where we want to add this selection, I can do the same thing, hit Command Delete or Control Delete, and it added that selection to our layer mask as well. So now just the mountains and the center part is selected. I actually think I want to brighten this with the mountains, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. Now let's go into our curves by double clicking on the icon. And let's just do kind of an S curve on these. Make them stand out, but also have some nice contrast. Yeah, I like that. I do think you can see as I am turning this on and off that it kind of emphasized the blueness of the mountains, and I don't really want that to be emphasized. So instead of having this layer be on normal, I'm just going to change it to luminosity. So now it's only affecting the luminosity of that layer, or of that section. It's not adjusting any color or anything. So now I think that looks pretty nice. I think this actually maybe over here is a little bit too bright. So if I press B for my brush tool, maybe let's do like a 50% opacity brush. I'm just going to make sure that my black brush is on top so that I'm hiding. I think I just want to paint this a little bit darker. Just, you know, atmospheric perspective is a thing, so kind of as you're going back in space, it's going to be a little bit darker. Also, these clouds are kind of hiding some of the light, so I think that makes sense. All right, I think that looks good. I think we could move on to some color now. This is maybe a bit dark in here, but I don't know, there's something about it that I kind of like. It's kind of mysterious because you can't really see what's going on there. So I think I'm gonna leave it, but you could take it out. So for color, I'm just gonna do a global color adjustment first by going to the color balance, the scales over here. And I'm gonna leave it on midtones for now. And I think I'm gonna add a little bit of red and some magenta and then some yellow to kind of warm things up as well. Maybe like 7 on the red. It's a little much. Yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. And then for just these clouds on the right side, I think I want to emphasize that color a little bit more, also on the reflection too. So an easy way to create that selection is we already have this kind of selection right here, and I kind of just want it to apply to these two sections. So instead of remasking all of that, I can just hit Command, click on this, so it's creating that selection again, but I want it to be inverted. So what I need to do is Shift Command I or Shift Control I to invert the selection first. Then I can go up onto my color balance layer mask, and I can press Option Delete or Alt Delete, and it will create that layer mask. Oh wait, I did it backwards. Command I, we got to invert it. So now it's the clouds that are revealed, and then the mountains are hidden. So that was for the original global one that I made. So we want to make sure that we're doing it on a separate one, but just to show you. So now let's add our color balance for that layer. And let's go back and make that selection. Okay. So now I think for those clouds on the right side, I'm just looking over here for now, and I'm probably going to mask it out of this section a bit. But I think I want to add a little more red to them. All right, so let's add a little bit more magenta too, and then a good amount of blue, or of yellow. Ooh, yeah, that's nice. I like that. Yeah, I feel like this is a little bit maybe too yellow now. So with my brush, make sure I'm selected on this layer mask. B for brush, I think I'm gonna leave it at that 50%. I'm gonna use a fairly big brush, black brush to conceal, and I'm gonna hide some of that color that I just did over here on both the reflection and the normal sky. All right, I think that looks pretty cool. Now I think let's do the mountains. I think that I want them to be a little bit warmer to kind of blend in with this really warm light. So to select our mountains again, remember just Command or Control and then click on that layer mask. Then let's go up and add another color balance. And this time I think I'm going to start with the shadows. And I think I want to make them a little bit more blue, just the shadows. Then in the midtones, I want those to be a little bit more goldeny and red. And then the highlights kind of over here, I think I want to emphasize the yellow on those. So I'm going to go up to my highlights. Definitely going to make this a little warmer. Yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. Let's see. Yeah, I feel like they're kind of seemingly reflecting more of that golden light, specifically like I'm looking here, than in the before. So yeah, oh, I think that looks nice. All right, I do think maybe let's add a little bit of vibrance and saturation to really make those colors pop. So let's go to the little triangle here for vibrant saturation. Again, vibrance is the kind of more subtle tones of your photo, and the saturation is global. I'm gonna add a fair amount here because I really want this to pop. I think that looks pretty cool. Yeah. I do think that maybe there could be a little bit more contrast in the mountains. So an easy way for me to adjust that is to go back to this curves layer of the mountains. I'm gonna double click on it and I'm just gonna drag these shadows down a little. Oh yeah, maybe the highlights up a bit. Cool. And I think maybe let's do one last like global curves adjustment. Just, I think it feels maybe a tad bit dark, so let's just brighten it up a smidge. I think I'm gonna mask out again with my black brush over here on this lighter section because I definitely don't want that to get blown out. And actually let's maybe add a little bit of contrast too. Okay. Oh yeah, that looks pretty cool. All right, let's look at the before and after now. So for before and after in Photoshop, come down to the first layer on the little eyeball, hold the Option key and press the eyeball, and it'll turn off all the layers except for your starting one. So we started here and then we ended here, which is kind of a big transformation. The mountains maybe are a little magenta over here, so I would probably want to fix that a little bit. And you know, I guess we've got a little bit of time. Let's fix it. So let's go to, let's make our mountain selection. Actually, no, I'm just gonna paint that in. So let's do color balance for these over here. And then let's just add a little green, maybe a tiny bit of blue. Actually, maybe more yellow. Okay. I'm going to Command I to hide that layer so that I can use my brush to brush it in. And I'm gonna keep it at that like 50%. Make sure I'm using a white brush to reveal. Maybe a little bit in the reflection too. Let's see now. Yeah, I think that helps. The snow is a little more white too, which helps to make it pop. Yeah, okay, so now I think I'm good with my color and my luminosities, so I will move on to the cropping and rotating. So if I hit C, I can bring up the crop menu, and right now I'm just leaving the ratio on the original ratio. And an easy way to straighten it in Photoshop is to use this little straighten tool. It's going to bring down this little like plus sign on your mouse. And I like to just find one end of the horizon, click and drag to where you think the other end is. Just a little bit of rotation there. All right, that looks pretty good. Then I need to crop in a bit since we've got some of this transparency coming through. And I actually think I'm going to crop more on this side. Bring this in a little bit. Yeah, let's see. I think that looks pretty cool. All right, let's do the before and after again. Yeah, all right, I think that looks pretty good. Let's look at it on the black background. So we're just right-clicking here. Yeah, I think I could maybe add a little more contrast over here, but I won't worry about that for now, just so that maybe it like was a little bit closer to how dark that is against the black background, but I think I'm gonna leave it because it doesn't bother me that much. Cool. And one of the coolest things about Photoshop is that there are several different methods for achieving the same effect. So you can find like what makes sense to you. You don't have to follow exactly the steps that I do. You know, you can kind of play around, get the general idea, and then there are so many different ways that you can do things, which is really cool. I think that's neat that you can kind of figure out what workflow works for you. That about wraps it up, I think. Again, you know, I think it looked great without editing, but you know, now the sky looks so much more like energetic and more vibrant, more bright, and it has a lot more depth to it, which I like. Okay, now very important, Command S, Control S, save your file. We don't want to lose anything that we've just done, so make sure you're saving, and I do recommend if you're in Photoshop to turn on the auto save feature so that it's continually auto saving while you're working. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. You know, with landscape photography, there are so many different approaches to editing too that it can be pretty overwhelming. You know, I encourage you to poke around in both Lightroom and Photoshop to see what the different tools and the different sliders do. You know, you might find your new favorite way of doing something. But I will say to those who are newer to editing landscape photos that it is quite easy to go overboard. Less is typically more. Like there are times when I edit a photo and I think like, oh, this looks great. And then I come back to it the next day and I give it the like, what were you thinking? So, you know, generally speaking, I would advise to err on the side of doing less, at least initially, you know, while you build up a good eye for subtlety and, you know, how much is too much with post-processing. Of course, editing is completely subjective, and you may not like something that I like, and that is perfectly okay. You aren't me, and I'm not you. You're allowed to have different opinions on what you want to do with your work. That's the beauty of art. You know, it belongs to you. So hopefully this gives you, you know, some things to think about while editing your landscape photos. Maybe you've learned some new tools and methods as well. Again, I highly recommend dedicating time to experimenting. You know, find what you do like, find what you don't like. You know, I always say when you're trying to find your own shooting style, to analyze your photos, to find what you most like about them. Don't focus on the flaws, focus on what you do like, and then go out and shoot more of that. And I think the exact same thing applies to editing. You know, try different things, find what you do like, and then do more of that with your photos. You know, that's how you start to develop your own editing style. And I wish that there was a shortcut that one day you could just wake up and you would be a fantastic editor and know exactly what you want, but there's really no secret. It just takes time and practice. So if you're a little intimidated by any of this, I also teach workshops, both in the field with editing sessions, as well as one-on-one workshops online, if you'd like more specific editing advice. You can check those out at my website at autumnschrock.com/workshops. Huge shout out to Sony and B&H for having me back on the event space again. It's always great to be here. Again, my name is Autumn Schrock, and you can find me all around the web on all the social medias as AutPops. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you next time.